Galactic Enforcement Record, Case File 7 to Theta 9, submitted by Senior Compliance Officer Vral of the Dominion Oversight Fleet, for the attention of the High Council of 12 Suns, classification urgent, disturbing, possibly career-ending for me. I, Vral, want it noted, for the official record, that I did not ask for this assignment. I want it noted that when my supervisor, Fleet Commander Osa, handed me this case, she smiled. That smile, I now understand, was not kindness. That smile was the expression of someone handing a burning torch to a person standing in a room full of firewood and saying, "Have fun." I was not having fun. Let me start from the beginning, because the High Council deserves to understand exactly how the species known as Homo sapiens, a civilization barely 400 years into interstellar travel, managed to make the entire Dominion Oversight Fleet look like a collection of confused hatchlings at their very first egg-cracking ceremony. It started with a routine patrol. Routine. That word. I used to like that word. The Keth Corridor is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the outer spiral arm. 12 registered species use it. 22 trading guilds hold active permits. The Dominion has maintained law and order in the Keth Corridor for over 6,000 years without significant incident. Then the humans arrived. Not in a hostile way, to be clear. No. If they had arrived with weapons blazing, we would have known exactly what to do. We have protocols for that. Beautiful, well-laminated protocols, stored in 17 different archive locations, updated every 50 years. What we did not have protocols for was the human cargo hauler Stubborn Grace, registration UETV-0091, Captain 1 Mira Okafor, who decided, on a perfectly calm Tuesday morning by Earth reckoning, to cut directly through the Veth exclusion zone. The Veth exclusion zone is sacred space. It is legally protected under the Dominion Compact of the Third Age. Article 44, subsection 9, paragraph 17, and a footnote that has historically caused more arguments among legal scholars than any other footnote in recorded history. No vessel may enter the Veth exclusion zone without a permit, a blessing from 2 certified Dominion clergy of different species, and a minimum crew dietary compliance report filed 14 days in advance. Mira Okafor did none of these things. Instead, she flew through the exclusion zone at a casual speed, broadcasting the following transmission on the open diplomatic channel, and I am quoting this directly from the audio log word for word because I want the High Council to understand what I was dealing with. She said, "Hey, if anyone's listening, we're just cutting through here to make a delivery deadline. No offense to whoever owns this space, we'll be out in about 20 minutes. Tell the priests we said hi." 20 minutes. She was in, through, and out of the most legally sensitive stretch of space in the outer arm in 20 minutes, waving goodbye on the comms channel, while my enforcement vessel, the IDS Patience of Law, was still completing the emergency alert sequence that requires 14 confirmation codes, a biometric scan from 3 senior officers, and a written request submitted to Central Dispatch explaining why the alert was justified. By the time we were cleared to respond, Stubborn Grace was already on the other side, making good time toward the Keth way station. I filed the violation notice anyway. That is procedure. The violation notice was 412 pages long, because the Veth exclusion transgression alone triggers responses from 8 different legal frameworks simultaneously. Mira Okafor responded to the 412-page violation notice with a single sentence: "Thanks for the paperwork, we'll look it over." She did not look it over. Now, here is where I want to be precise for the Council, because what happened next is the part that I believe requires the most careful documentation. I was dispatched personally to intercept Stubborn Grace at the Keth way station and deliver a formal Dominion compliance order. A Dominion compliance order is not a suggestion, it is not a firm recommendation. It is a legally binding instrument that carries the full weight of 6,000 years of interstellar law, backed by the authority of the 12 Suns Council, and enforceable by every fleet in Dominion jurisdiction. 14 species have surrendered entire planetary systems rather than violate a compliance order. I want the Council to hold that fact in their minds as I describe what happened when I boarded Stubborn Grace. The ship was smaller than I expected. Humans are small creatures, and their vessels tend toward a compact efficiency that our architects find architecturally offensive. The corridors were narrow. The lighting was warm, yellowish, which I found unsettling. There were decorations on the walls, photographs of places I later learned from their home world. A small plant in a pot near the navigation station, which I almost collided with when a human crew member appeared from around a corner and startled me. "Oh, hey," said the human, young by their standards. Large eyes, short hair, holding what I later identified as a beverage container. "You must be the compliance guy. Caps in the bridge, go on ahead." The compliance guy. I am Senior Enforcement Officer Vral of the Dominion Oversight Fleet. I have been decorated for service 7 times. I once talked a Grekath warlord out of annexing a moon simply by reading regulatory statute aloud for 3 hours. The compliance guy. I proceeded to the bridge with as much dignity as I could manage, given that the corridor lighting was making me feel vaguely like I was inside a very cozy trap. Captain Mira Okafor was exactly as I had seen in her registration files. Medium height by human standards. Dark skin, natural hair pulled back. A jacket covered in small insignia patches that I did not recognize. She was leaning against the navigation console eating something from a small container with a utensil, and she looked up when I entered with an expression of polite interest. "Officer Vral," she said, as if we were old acquaintances. "Take a seat, you want something to drink? We've got coffee, which you probably can't have, and water, which I hope is universal." "Captain Okafor," I said in my most formal register. I activated my compliance display, which projected the full Dominion seal in glowing golden light across her bridge, which is a visual that has caused senior diplomats to go pale. "I am here to present you with Dominion Compliance Order 7 Theta 9, which formally charges you and your vessel with 17 violations of the Keth Corridor Navigation Compact. Entry into protected space without authorization, failure to respond to a certified enforcement alert within the required 12 rotation window, and conduct unbecoming of a registered interstellar operator." Mira Okafor looked at the glowing golden Dominion seal. Then she looked at me. Then she said, "That's adorable. I want to be clear that nothing in my 17 years of enforcement training prepared me for that response." "I beg your pardon?" I said. "The seal," she said, gesturing at it with her eating utensil. "It's really impressive looking, very official. Gold is a nice touch. Who designed it?" "The seal was commissioned in the Second Age of the Dominion by the founding architects of the 12 Suns Council, and it represents the sovereign authority of a governing body that spans over 400 inhabited star systems," I said. "Cool," she said. "So what's the fine?" The fine, I explained, was not simply a fine. The fine was one component of a multi-stage compliance resolution process that required first an acknowledgement of violation, second a formal apology submitted through the appropriate diplomatic channels, third a mandatory navigation review course for the entire crew, fourth a 6-month restricted transit permit, and fifth a bond payment of 12,000 Dominion trade credits held in escrow pending the review process. Mira Okafor listened to all of this. She nodded thoughtfully at several points. When I finished, she said, "What happens if we don't do any of that?" I told her that non-compliance with a Dominion compliance order resulted in vessel impoundment, crew detainment, and referral to the Admiralty Court of the Outer Spiral, which had not ruled in favor of a non-Dominion party in recorded history. She said, "Okay, so, question. Do you actually have the crew to impound us right now? Or is this more of a 'I'm going to have to call some people' situation?" I said nothing for 4 full seconds, which in Dominion enforcement culture is the equivalent of a senior officer sitting down on the floor and crying, because the honest answer was that the IDS Patience of Law was a 2-officer compliance vessel, and impoundment required a minimum of a Class 4 enforcement team, which I would indeed have to call for, and which would take, given current fleet positioning, approximately 9 days to arrive. Mira Okafor could tell, from my 4 seconds of silence, that the honest answer was not the answer I wanted to give. She smiled. It was not an aggressive smile, it was not a mocking smile, it was, and this is what I find most haunting, a sympathetic smile, the smile of someone who has just watched you step in something unfortunate and genuinely feels bad about it. "Here's the thing, Officer Vral," she said, setting down her food container. "I respect the law, I genuinely do, but your exclusion zone wasn't marked on any human navigation charts. We filed our route with 3 different waystation registries and nobody flagged it. The only reason I knew it was sacred space is because your alert, which arrived 14 minutes after we'd already exited, used that phrase, and your fine is 12,000 credits, which is more than my entire cargo is worth, for a 20-minute transit that harmed absolutely no one." She folded her arms. "So I'm not signing the compliance order, not because I don't respect the Dominion, but because the Dominion's paperwork does not account for the fact that the VETH exclusion zone is not published in any database that human ships use. And if you want to argue about that, I'm happy to argue. I've got coffee, and I've got time." I looked at her. She looked at me. The small plant near the navigation console sat there, silently, being a plant. "You are refusing a Dominion compliance order," I said slowly. "I'm contesting it on grounds of inadequate notice and disproportionate penalty," she said cheerfully. "There's a difference. The first one makes me a criminal, the second one makes me a litigant. Humans are excellent litigants. We've had lawyers for a very long time. I filed my incident report that evening from the IDS Patience of Law, moored at the Keth way station in a bay that cost 17 credits per rotation. In my 17 years of service, I had never written the phrase responding party invoked contested liability doctrine and requested formal arbitration in a field previously reserved for vessel impounded, crew detained, case closed. I transmitted it to Fleet Commander Osa. She responded in 6 words. I told you. Good luck, Vral. The arbitration hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, at Keth Station's neutral mediation chamber before a certified Dominion arbitration panel. I arrived early. I prepared extensively. I had 17 precedents, 42 supporting documents, and a legal summary that my colleagues called comprehensive and thorough, and Vral, you need to sleep. Mira Okafor arrived with one person, a young human woman named Suki Brandt, who carried a single data tablet and wore an expression of mild academic interest, like someone attending a lecture they expected to find somewhat entertaining. I asked, through the mediator, whether Captain Okafor had brought a legal team. Mira Okafor said Suki was her legal team. Suki Brandt smiled at me and said, I interned at the Outer Spiral Trade Commission for a summer. Also, I have a degree in xenolaw. Also, I found 17 errors in the compliance order on the flight over. Would you like me to go through them now or after you present? The arbitration lasted 4 hours. I won on 6 points. Suki Brandt won on 11. The compliance order was reduced to a formal notice, a 20-credit administrative processing fee, and a recommendation that the Dominion update its navigation database to include exclusion zone markers in human-readable formats. 20 credits. I sat in the mediator's chamber after the hearing, alone except for the mediator, a Pelosian named Gret who had the courtesy to look slightly sympathetic. In my 400 years of mediation, Gret said carefully, I have never seen a human litigant. How was it? I asked. Gret considered this for a moment. Unsettling, he said. But also, I must admit, rather impressive. I thought about Mira Okafor saying that's adorable to 6,000 years of interstellar law. I thought about Suki Brandt finding 17 errors in my compliance order on a cargo hauler during a 3-week transit. I thought about the small plant on the navigation console, which I was increasingly beginning to see as a metaphor for something, and I began, for the first time in my career, to suspect that the humans were going to be a very specific kind of problem that the Dominion had absolutely no existing paperwork to address. I was right. Galactic Enforcement Record, Case File 7-Theta-9, Supplemental Log, submitted by Senior Compliance Officer Vral of the Dominion Oversight Fleet, continued from primary record. Mood of submitting officer, resigned. Professionally, and also personally. 3 weeks after the arbitration hearing, I received new orders. I want to describe the exact moment I read those orders because I think it captures something important about the nature of my suffering. I was at my desk on the IDS Patience of Law. I had a warm beverage. The lights were at a comfortable setting. I was, for the first time in a month, at something approaching peace. Then the orders arrived. Fleet Commander Osa, in her infinite wisdom and what I now believe is a deep personal enjoyment of watching me struggle, had assigned me as the permanent Dominion liaison officer to the human trade delegation operating out of Keth Station. Permanent, not temporary, not rotational. Permanent. The orders used the phrase unique diplomatic opportunity. They also used the phrase your demonstrated experience with human operators, which was, I want to note, a very generous way of describing the fact that a cargo hauler captain and her one-person legal team had dismantled my compliance filing in 4 hours. I reported to Keth Station the following morning. Mira Okafor was waiting at the docking bay. She had coffee. She handed me a cup of something that was not coffee but smelled warm and said, I heard they assigned you to us. Good. You seem like someone who actually wants to understand things, which is rarer than you'd think. I looked at the cup. I looked at her. You are aware, I said, that I was sent here to monitor your delegation's compliance with Dominion trade regulations. Sure, she said. And I'm aware that the fastest way to make that miserable for both of us is to treat you like an obstacle instead of a person, so, welcome to the human trade post. Try not to trip over Suki's research stacks, they're everywhere. She was not wrong about the research stacks. The human trade delegation at Keth Station occupied a mid-size commercial unit on the station's outer ring. It was not what I expected. I had seen Dominion diplomatic facilities which tend toward formal grandeur, lots of clean lines, official seals, furniture designed to communicate authority. The Pelosian Trade Office had 17 different species of decorative stone arranged in a pattern that conveyed stability and ancient legitimacy. The human trade post had a hand-painted sign on the door that said UATV Trade and Diplomatic Affairs, Keth Station. Below it, in smaller writing, someone had added, "Please knock, Suki might be on a call." Inside there were 4 humans. Mira, who I knew, Suki Brandt, who I also knew and who looked up from a stack of documents when I entered and said, "Oh good, the compliance guy is back," in a tone that was not unkind, just efficiently categorizing me. A large, quiet man named Dobie Ferrer, who managed cargo logistics and communicated primarily in nods and very specific hand gestures, and a younger woman named Petra Quill, who handled communications and greeted me by asking if I wanted to see the decorative plant she had just added to the window ledge. It was the same species of plant as the one on Stubborn Grace. I asked if all human ships and offices had these plants. Petra said, "We like having living things around. It helps." I did not ask what it helped with. I was developing a sense that human answers to simple questions frequently opened doors to subjects that required significant sitting down to process. My first 2 weeks as liaison were, I will admit, educational. The humans were not reckless. That had been my initial read of Mira Okafor, and I had been wrong. They were not people who ignored rules. They were people who had a very specific relationship with rules, which could be summarized as, a rule must make sense. It must be clearly communicated, and it must be proportionate to the situation it governs. If it failed any of those 3 tests, they would not break it exactly, but they would contest it so thoroughly and so cheerfully that the end result was functionally similar. Suki Brandt spent her mornings reading Dominion trade law, not skimming it, reading it, taking notes, cross-referencing sections. She had flagged by the end of my first week 41 inconsistencies between the Keth Corridor Navigation Compact and the General Outer Arm Transit Guidelines, 3 clauses that directly contradicted each other in the cargo tariff schedule, and 1 section of the diplomatic immunity framework that she described as almost certainly written by someone who had never met a diplomat. When I mentioned that those documents had been in continuous legal use for over 2,000 years, she said, "Yeah, that tracks. 2,000 years of nobody pointing out the problems doesn't mean there aren't problems. It means nobody wanted to be the one to say something." Then she went back to her notes. I sat with that for a while. The incident that I believe the High Council most needs to understand occurred in week 4 of my posting. A Dominion trade inspection team arrived at Keth Station. Standard procedure, scheduled quarterly. The inspection team was led by Inspector Callis, a veteran of 30 years' service, methodical, humorless, and deeply committed to the letter of every regulation in a way that made even other Dominion officers slightly nervous. Callis reviewed the human trade delegation's documentation and found, within 40 minutes, 12 items he considered non-compliant. Some of these items were genuine administrative oversights, the kind of small paperwork gaps that every trading operation accumulates, easily corrected. 3 of them were things that Suki had already flagged as contradictory regulations, where compliance with one rule automatically created a violation of another, and one of them was an inspection of Stubborn Grace herself, during which Callis cited the decorative plant near the navigation console as an unauthorized biological element in a registered trade vessel. He issued a removal order for the plant. I watched Mira Okafor's expression when she read the removal order. She did not get angry. This was the thing about her that I had been learning to pay attention to. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue loudly. She went very still and very calm in the way that I was beginning to recognize after 4 weeks as significantly more concerning than anger. She said, "Callis, what rule does the plant violate?" Callis said, "Biological Containment Regulation 17C, subsection 4, which prohibits unauthorized living organisms in registered cargo vessels." Mira said, "Is the plant in the cargo hold?" Callis said no. Mira said, "Is it a pathogenic organism? A restricted species? Listed anywhere on the Dominion Biological Hazard Register?" Callis said no. Mira said, "Then what specifically is the hazard that Regulation 17C was written to prevent, and how does my navigation console plant create that hazard?" Callis stared at her. She stared back. Dobie, from somewhere near the cargo manifest station, made a small sound that I believe was him trying not to laugh. Callis said stiffly that the regulation did not require him to demonstrate specific hazard. The regulation prohibited unauthorized biological elements. The plant was a biological element. It was not authorized. Mira said, "Where do I apply for authorization?" Callis said there was no authorization pathway for personal biological elements on trade vessels. Mira said very pleasantly, So you've written a regulation prohibiting something with no process to make it permitted, and you're citing that regulation against a potted plant that has been on this vessel for 3 years without incident, is that correct? Callus said that was correct. Mira nodded slowly. Then she turned to Suki. Suki was already writing. What followed was, in my professional experience, one of the most extraordinary 48-hour periods in Keth Station's diplomatic history. Suki Brandt filed a formal regulatory review petition with the Dominion Trade Authority, citing the plant removal order as grounds for a full examination of Biological Containment Regulation 17C. She attached a 17-page brief arguing that the regulation as written was overreaching, arbitrarily applied, and created compliance obligations with no corresponding safety benefit. She also, and this is the part I want the Council to note carefully, copied the filing to 14 other human trade vessels currently operating in the Keth corridor. All 14 responded within 6 hours. Apparently 4 of them had received similar citations, for plants, for small personal items, for the presence of non-standard food containers in crew quarters, 1 citation for a human crew member who had a small decorative fish in a sealed water vessel in their personal berth. All of them had quietly paid the administrative fees or removed the items without contesting. They had not, until Suki's filing, been aware that the same citation had been issued to multiple crews for similar items. Within 48 hours, the regulatory review petition had 16 co-signatories from 12 different vessels, a formal response demand from the Human Outer Arm Trade Consortium, and a very uncomfortable meeting request from the Dominion Trade Authority's regional director, who had never, in 40 years of service, received a petition with 16 co-signatories that had been assembled in 2 days over a potted plant. Callus left Keth Station on a scheduled rotation before the meeting. I suspected the timing was not entirely coincidental. I attended the meeting with the regional director, a senior Dominion official named Overin, who had traveled from the sector hub specifically because his staff had flagged the petition as requiring senior attention. Overin was experienced, careful, and had a look in his eyes when he entered the mediation room that I recognized because I had worn it myself. It was the look of someone who had just realized the situation was much more complicated than the initial briefing suggested. Mira sat across from him. Suki sat beside her with a data tablet. Petra was there taking notes. Dobie was there for reasons that were not entirely clear but that I had learned to accept as standard human operational practice. Overin opened by acknowledging that the petition raised some valid procedural questions. Mira said, "Great. Let's go through them." They went through them for 3 hours. Overin, to his credit, was not defensive. He was a career bureaucrat in the best sense, someone who genuinely believed that well-made rules served a purpose and was therefore capable of recognizing when a rule had stopped serving its purpose. By the second hour, he was asking Suki clarifying questions about her legal analysis with the tone of a senior scholar consulting a junior one who had found something interesting. By the third hour, he had agreed to initiate a formal review of Biological Containment Regulation 17C, suspend all outstanding citations issued under that regulation pending review, and establish a joint working group to examine the broader question of navigation database synchronization between Dominion archives and human shipping registries. The navigation database issue, the one that had started all of this with the Veth exclusion zone. Mira had walked into an argument about a plant and walked out with a structural reform process. I sat in the empty mediation room after everyone else had left, looking at the table, thinking about the nature of patience and the specific kind of strategic intelligence that looks, from the outside, like someone who is simply very committed to being reasonable. Petra Quill came back in to collect a datapad she had left behind. She saw my expression. "You okay?" she asked. I said I was processing. She nodded, picked up her datapad, and then paused at the door. "You know," she said, "back on Earth we have a word for what Mira does. When someone uses a small, clear, winnable fight to force a bigger conversation that needed to happen anyway." I asked what the word was. Petra smiled. "Leverage," she said. "We've been doing it since before we had writing. It's kind of our thing." She left. I stayed in the room a little longer. Outside the mediation chamber window, the Keth corridor stretched out in all its ancient, busy, legally complicated glory. 12 species, 22 guilds, 6,000 years of continuous Dominion law, and 1 human cargo hauler currently docked in Bay 7 with a potted plant on its navigation console which had just, without firing a single weapon or raising a single voice, prompted the first formal regulatory review the Dominion Trade Authority had initiated in over 200 years. I filed my weekly report to Fleet Commander Osa that evening. At the bottom, where the form asks for recommended action, I wrote something I had never written in 17 years of service. I wrote, "No enforcement action recommended. Recommend instead that the Dominion Legal Review Board be briefed on human litigation methodology. specifically the practice of contesting small regulatory violations as a mechanism for identifying and correcting systemic inconsistencies. Further recommend that human trade delegates be formally invited to participate in the next scheduled review of the Outer Arm Navigation Compact. I paused. Then I added, also recommend updating Biological Containment Regulation 17C to include a clear authorization pathway for personal plant life. This is a reasonable thing to want on a long voyage, and the current regulation is frankly disproportionate. Osa responded 40 minutes later. She said, "Who are you and what happened to Vral?" I said, "He learned something. I am told this is a professional hazard when assigned to humans." She said, "Fair enough. Good work." I returned to the human trade post the following morning. The hand-painted sign was still on the door. Suki was already on a call. Dobie nodded at me from across the room in the way that I had learned meant hello. Petra was adding a second plant to the window ledge. Mira was at her desk with coffee, reviewing a cargo manifest. She looked up when I came in. "Morning, Vral," she said. "You look like someone who slept better than expected." I said I had, somewhat to my own surprise. She smiled, the same way she had in that first arbitration, not triumphant, not mocking, just warm, genuinely warm. The smile of someone who was glad to see you because you were, in some way she had decided privately, worth being glad to see. "Good," she said. "We've got a scheduling conflict with a Pelosian Guild representative, and I need a second opinion on whether it's a genuine calendar error or a deliberate delay tactic. You know the Pelosian bureaucratic style better than anyone here." I sat down at the consultation table. Mira slid a document across to me. "I read it," I said. "Deliberate delay. The signature date is filed in the Pelosian administrative calendar, which runs 17 days behind the station standard. If they wanted to comply on time, they would have used station standard. They used their calendar specifically because it gives them 17 days of additional negotiating room while appearing technically compliant." Mira looked at me. "That," she said quietly, "is exactly the kind of thing I needed to know." She picked up her comm. I picked up my own datapad, and we went to work. Final note submitted by Senior Compliance Officer Vral, currently serving as Permanent Dominion Liaison to the Human Outer Arm Trade Delegation, Keth Station. Status update for the High Council. The humans are not a threat. They are something considerably more interesting than a threat. They are, in the precise Dominion legal sense, a catalyst. The Dominion has 6,000 years of accumulated law. The humans have a plant, a lawyer, and the specific kind of patience that comes from a species that has been arguing with institutions since before they reached the stars. The Dominion is going to be fine. It is also never going to be quite the same. Vral considers this, on balance, an improvement. He will deny saying this if asked officially. He is saying it anyway.